It was Christmas Eve, the streets were glowing with lights, children's laughter echoed in the air, and every house I passed seemed wrapped in warmth, joy, and celebration. But inside me, there was a strange emptiness. I clutched the steering wheel tighter as I drove through the snow-covered road, my heart unsettled, almost as if something was pulling me toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. My daughter, Emily, had been married for only a year. She had always dreamed of a perfect Christmas with her new family, one filled with laughter, traditions, and acceptance. When she called me earlier in the week, her voice had carried a false cheerfulness, as though she was forcing herself to sound happy. I knew her better than anyone. Behind that laugh, she was hiding something. Snowflakes fell heavily on the windshield, and I slowed down. The warmth of my car heater didn't stop the chill creeping into my chest. For some reason, tonight I felt compelled to see her. No invitation, no warning. Just a father's instinct that his daughter needed him. As I turned into the long driveway of her in-laws' grand house, I was struck by its beauty. The tall windows glowed with golden light, a giant Christmas tree stood proudly near the glass, and I could hear faint music and laughter spilling out from inside. It was the kind of house Emily used to describe when she was a child, the kind she imagined living in when she believed in fairy tales. I parked my car silently, stepping out into the biting cold. My shoes crunched against the snow as I walked closer. From the window, I could see her husband's family gathered by the fireplace. They were drinking, laughing, their faces glowing with comfort and joy. For a moment, I almost smiled, hoping my daughter was somewhere among them, smiling too. But then I saw her. Not inside. Not by the fire. Not with them. She was outside, on the back porch, sitting on a wooden step, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her dress was thin, not nearly enough for the freezing night. She was shivering, her face pale, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The contrast was unbearable, the warmth and laughter inside versus the loneliness and cold that engulfed her outside. My heart clenched. What was she doing there? Why wasn't she inside with her husband, with her family-in-law, celebrating Christmas like she had always dreamed of? I rushed around the side of the house, my breath heavy in the frosty air. When she saw me, her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. I bent down, pulling off my coat immediately and wrapping it around her shoulders. "Emily, what on earth are you doing out here? It's freezing." She tried to smile, but her lips quivered. I didn't think you'd come." "I shouldn't have needed to," I said softly, brushing the snow from her hair. "You should be inside, by the fire. Why are you out here?" Her eyes darted toward the glowing windows, where her husband's family continued to laugh, oblivious. For a long moment, she said nothing, just tightened the coat around herself and buried her face into the fabric as though she wanted to disappear. And then, in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "Because they don't want me there." The words struck me like ice water. "What do you mean?" "You're his wife. Your family." She shook her head slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Not to them. I'm just an outsider. They never say it outright, but their eyes, their whispers, the way they laugh at me when I try to join in. I don't belong, Dad. Tonight, they told me I should give them space, that Christmas traditions are their thing. So I came out here." My chest tightened with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I glanced again at the glowing window, the family laughing without a care in the world, while my daughter, my little girl, sat outside in the freezing cold. "Emily," I said firmly, lifting her chin so she would look at me. "No one, absolutely no one, gets to make you feel this way. You hear me?" Her lips trembled, and she leaned into me, her body shaking not just from the cold but from the weight of everything she had been holding inside. I thought marriage would mean I finally had a family that accepted me. But I was wrong. I hugged her tightly, pressing my cheek against her snow-dusted hair. In that moment, the laughter from inside no longer sounded joyful, it sounded cruel, like a mockery. I wanted to storm into that house, to confront every single one of them. But I held back, because right now, my daughter didn't need a fight. She needed warmth. She needed love. She needed her father. "Come on," I whispered, helping her to her feet. "You're coming with me." She resisted weakly. "But, they'll notice." "Good," I said with quiet fury. "Let them." I guided her toward my car, wrapping my arm around her as though shielding her from the whole world. She was still shivering, but I could feel her relax slightly under my touch, as if finally she didn't have to pretend anymore. As we reached the car, she glanced back at the glowing windows. The sight of that warmth, that family who had excluded her, cut her deeper than she wanted to admit. But then she looked at me, and for the first time that night, her eyes softened with something like relief. "Dad," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "Yes, sweetheart? Thank you for coming." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Always. No matter where you are, no matter what happens, I'll always come for you." I opened the car door and helped her inside. As the heater hummed to life and the warmth slowly returned to her body, I sat behind the wheel, staring at the mansion in the rearview mirror. Inside, they were still laughing. Inside, they still thought Christmas was perfect. But they had no idea that outside, they had broken someone's spirit. And as I drove away with my daughter, I made a silent promise. This would not be the last Christmas she would ever feel unwanted. I would make sure of it. The road stretched endlessly before us, the headlights cutting through the heavy snow. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat, wrapped in my coat, staring out the window as if the darkness held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the heater and the tires crunching over the frozen road. Finally, I broke the silence. "Do you want to talk about it?" Her breath fogged up the glass as she shook her head. But then, almost as if the words forced themselves out, she whispered, "He didn't defend me, Dad. Not once." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Your husband?" She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the snow outside. "I thought he'd stand up for me, at least tonight. But when they told me to step out, he just lowered his gaze. As if agreeing with them." Her voice cracked. "Do you know how humiliating that feels? To watch the man you love sit silently while his family pushes you aside?" I felt anger bubbling inside me, anger I tried to control because my daughter needed calm, not rage. "Emily," I said gently, "silence can sometimes hurt more than words. And if he stood by and let this happen, then he's failed you." Tears slid down her cheeks. She hugged my coat tighter, as though hiding from the truth. "Maybe I made a mistake, Dad. Maybe I married the wrong person." I wanted to disagree, to tell her she was just upset and things would get better. But I had seen the pain in her eyes, the loneliness she had been living with. This wasn't just one night. This was a wound that had been bleeding quietly for a long time. As we drove, my mind drifted back to when Emily was a child. She used to press her face against the frosty window every Christmas Eve, waiting for Santa. Her little hands would tug at my arm, eyes sparkling with excitement. And every year, no matter how tired I was, I'd carry her outside into the snow, just so she could watch the stars and whisper her wishes. Her biggest wish every single year had always been the same: I want a family who's always happy together. And tonight, seeing her crushed under the weight of rejection, I realized how cruel life had been to her innocent wish. I glanced at her again. "Sweetheart, do you remember when you were 10, and we built that snowman together in the yard? You were freezing, your gloves were soaked, and I told you we should go inside, but you refused until it was perfect." A small, broken smile tugged at her lips. "You kept bringing me hot cocoa in between, so I wouldn't turn into ice." I chuckled softly. "Exactly. You've always been stronger than you think. You've always fought for the things you love. But strength doesn't mean suffering in silence. It means knowing when to stand up and say enough. She leaned her head against the window, her voice fragile. But what if saying enough means losing him? My chest ached at the fear in her tone. Then maybe he was never yours to begin with. Because love isn't tested when life is easy. It's tested when it's hard. And tonight, he failed that test. The weight of those words lingered in the car. I could see her wrestling with them, her fingers tightening and loosening around the fabric of my coat. We drove into the small town where the streets were lined with glowing lights and wreaths. Families were gathered around fireplaces, children building snowmen in their yards, couples walking hand in hand. Everywhere, there was warmth. And yet beside me sat my daughter, shivering not from the cold but from betrayal. I pulled into a small cafe that was miraculously open. The windows were fogged from the heat inside, and the faint smell of coffee and cinnamon drifted out each time the door opened. "Come on," I said softly. "Let's get you warm." Inside, the cafe was cozy, filled with a handful of people sipping hot drinks, their cheeks flushed from the cold. I guided Emily to a corner booth, away from curious eyes. She wrapped her hands around the steaming mug of cocoa the waitress brought, staring into it as though it held answers. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think they'll even notice I left?" I leaned back, studying her face. If they truly cared, they'd notice. If they truly loved you, they'd come looking. Her lips trembled. They won't. Because I've never been more than a guest in their home. A stranger in their traditions. She swallowed hard. I tried, Dad. I cooked with them, decorated with them, even learned their silly carols. But every time, they looked at me like I didn't belong. Like I was an intruder in their perfect little world. I reached across the table, holding her hand firmly. Listen to me, Emily. Belonging doesn't come from trying to fit into someone else's world. It comes from building your own. You don't need their approval to be enough. Tears finally spilled from her eyes, and she let them. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't pretending to be strong. She was just my little girl again, broken but safe in the only place she could be herself, beside me. For the first time that night, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, fragile but real. And as we sat there, with the warmth of cocoa and the sound of distant Christmas bells, I knew this night would change everything. Because sometimes, Christmas doesn't reveal the family that accepts you. It reveals the family that never will. And it teaches you to hold on tighter to the ones who always have. The cafe had grown quieter as the night stretched on. Outside, snowflakes continued to fall, blanketing the town in pure white. Emily sat across from me, her cocoa long gone, her eyes distant as though she were caught between the past and the uncertain future. I knew she was still thinking about him, about the man she had married and the silence he had chosen over her dignity. A silence that cut deeper than any harsh word ever could. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Do you think he'll even call, Dad? Or will he just wake up tomorrow, open his gifts, and pretend like nothing happened?" I exhaled slowly, my heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "Sweetheart, if he does call, the real question is, what are you going to say?" Her brows furrowed. I don't know. Part of me wants to run back, just so I don't lose him. But another part of me is so tired, Dad. Tired of fighting for a place at a table that was never meant for me. I leaned forward, my voice steady but gentle. "Emily, love isn't supposed to be a fight you fight alone. If he loved you the way you deserve, you wouldn't have to beg for a seat at that table. He'd build one with you." Her lips trembled, and for a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "I'm scared to start over." I reached for her hand again, squeezing it firmly. "Do you remember when you learned to ride a bike? You fell, scraped your knees, cried until you swore you'd never get on it again. But you did. You got back on, and before long, you were riding like the wind." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "You ran beside me the whole time." "Exactly," I said, my throat tightening. And I'll run beside you now too. No matter how many times life knocks you down, you'll never face it alone. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but this time, they weren't only of pain. There was something else too, something like strength flickering back to life. Just then, her phone buzzed on the table. The name flashing across the screen made her breath hitch. It was him. Her husband. She stared at it, frozen. I stayed silent, letting her decide. After a few moments, she answered, her voice shaking. Hello? I couldn't hear his words, but I could see the way her expression shifted, hope flickering, then fading, replaced by a quiet resignation. Finally, she whispered, I needed you tonight. And you weren't there. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on, firmer this time. I can't keep shrinking myself just to fit into your family's picture. If you can't stand beside me, then maybe this marriage isn't what I thought it was. There was silence. Then she hung up, her hands trembling, tears spilling freely now. She looked at me, her face pale but her eyes clearer than I'd seen all night. I did it, she whispered, almost as if she didn't believe it herself. I actually said it. I stood and moved beside her, pulling her into my arms. I'm proud of you, Emily. More than you'll ever know. She clung to me, sobbing, but these weren't the same tears she had shed on the porch. These were the tears of someone who had finally stopped pretending, someone who had chosen herself over rejection. After a while, when the storm outside had softened, we left the cafe and drove home. She leaned against the window, silent but calmer, as if a heavy weight had finally lifted from her chest. When we reached my house, I lit the fireplace and handed her one of the old wool blankets she used to wrap herself in as a child. She curled up on the couch, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. For the first time that night, I saw peace slowly returning to her features. As I sat across from her, watching her breathe deeply, I realized something profound. Christmas wasn't about the perfect family gathered around a perfect fire. It was about love, the kind that never falters, never excludes, never makes you feel less than. The kind that shows up, no matter what. Emily looked up at me, her voice soft but steady. Dad, do you think I'll ever find someone who truly sees me? I smiled sadly, but with conviction. You will. But until then, you already have someone who does. Her eyes filled again, but this time she smiled through the tears. You. Always, I said, my voice breaking. Always me. That night, we sat together by the fire, no grand mansion, no glittering decorations, no crowd of laughing strangers. Just a father and his daughter, two souls bound by love that no rejection could ever shatter. And as the snow fell silently outside, I knew this Christmas, though painful, was the beginning of her freedom. The night she discovered her worth. The night she stopped being a guest in someone else's story, and began writing her own. The clock struck midnight, and distant church bells echoed through the quiet town. Emily leaned against my shoulder, her breathing even as sleep finally claimed her. I tucked the blanket tighter around her and stared into the flames, my heart heavy but hopeful. She had been broken tonight. But she wasn't destroyed. Because sometimes, the cruelest nights lead to the brightest mornings. And as her father, I would make sure every morning after this one reminded her she was never alone. This Christmas wasn't about loss. It was about discovery. And Emily had finally discovered the truth. She was enough. She had always been enough. And no family's laughter by the fire would ever change that.